Part 1 explored how Buddhism began to make substantial growth in the West in the 1960s. The 70s saw the first wave of Western converts beginning to teach the Dharma to other Westerners, and faced the formidable challenge of adapting Asian teaching forms and institutions to modern sensibilities. Now in Part 2, our road movie continues, seeking out many of the first generation of Western-born Buddhist teachers to look through their eyes at some critical questions. Whether the actual content of Buddhism, will it transform beyond recognition? Will it retain its spiritual depth in the shallow seas of modern materialism? Will it survive at all?
I have a fear that in 50 years' time, Buddhist centers will look a bit like theosophical lodges do to us today. Filled with rather elderly people, rather out of touch with the current world, and persisting in their rituals and practices as though nothing much had changed.
Now, a lot of the Dharma teachers have said that they're noticing there are fewer and fewer younger people in the retreats. Noah, our son, who's a meditation teacher, has often said that there's more and more gray heads. The ocean that's the audience is more and more gray. There's more gray more fleck on the waves.
My hope is that the depth of practice will not be lost.
You can see how easy it would be for some of the most precious, most powerful practices that I've been able to do and have learned, how they can be passed on to people who are not willing or not able to devote large chunks of time that way.
Particularly reincarnation. That, to me, is the one point that I've struggled with, probably since the very, very beginning.
I don't think that there's any way in which we can dispense of the concept of reincarnation and truly practice Buddhism in a serious way.
There have to be Westerners who've experienced awakening. There's no doubt about it.
One of the great obstacles, I think, in Western Buddhism is the fact that Western people, in their materialistic arrogance, cannot imagine an extraordinary person.
What I'm resisting, and I think what is counterproductive, is the idea of a state of mind or being that is attainable by an individual, that then makes you somehow superhuman.
Always remain in contact with the root. And the branches can fall down, and it's not so important if we maintain the roots.
But what are the roots? All Buddhists agree that the Four Noble Truths and dependent arising are foundational. They are in the discourses of the Buddha, memorized by monks during his lifetime and transmitted orally for 200 years after his death, until they were written down in the sutras known as the Pali Canon. But their implications, especially as the framework for experiences in deep meditation that can radically transform the mind, are now being looked at from the viewpoint of modernity, as Western Dharma teachers try to distinguish the essence of Buddhism from its Asian cultural constructs. But separating culture from religion is not an easy task. James Shaheen is the editor of Tricycle, the Buddhist Review.
A lot of people think that there's a pure Buddhism and then there's a lot of cultural baggage. I don't see it that way because I can't really distinguish culture from the religion of Buddhism itself. I do know that, and a lot of people don't even call it a religion. I happen to think it is a religion. So it's not possible really to strip it down to its bare essentials, I don't think. Because it's inseparable from culture. It comes from people. And it does, however, evolve in different cultural contexts. And every time that happens, people are going to have to ask themselves, what is baby and what is bathwater? Now, that's not an easy thing to answer. Look at Alan Wallace and Stephen Batchelor. They have two very different takes or responses to the very same tradition.
In the 1970s, Alan Wallace and Stephen Batchelor were fellow Tibetan monks. Today, Alan Wallace is a Dharma teacher and scientist based in Santa Barbara, California, and in Thailand, where he directs the Phuket International Academy Mind Center and runs intensive 8-week shamatha meditation retreats for his Western students.
Is it true or is it not that people have past lives? Can we explore this rigorously, objectively, so that it stands up to even the most careful scrutiny?
An experienced practitioner of long-term solitary retreats, he is very traditional in his opinions about some of the new interpretive currents emerging in Western Buddhism.
As Buddhism moves into modernity, it's facing perhaps its greatest challenge and its greatest opportunity since its inception. On the one hand, we find the secularization of Buddhism. There is, of course, a lot of antipathy towards religion of any kind by many secular people in the modern world. And so some people with this, at least a great sense of unease and perhaps actual antipathy towards religion, then look at Buddhism and they look at it and say, well, this is a religion too, or at least has very major religious aspects, but we can salvage it. We can salvage it. We can save Buddhism. And that is, we'll just take what we like. And that is, we like mindfulness. We like the cultivation of loving kindness. We like the ethical principles of nonviolence. We like compassion. And what winds up coming out of this very selective approach is Buddhism really then is reincarnated, so to speak, or it evolves and mutates into something that I would say is tantamount to a new school of psychology. It's heavily psychologized, all references to what the promoters of this approach deem metaphysical, such things as the continuity of individual consciousness after death, the re-embodiment of consciousness, so we call it reincarnation or rebirth, the nature of karma, the patterns or regularities of karma, often called the laws of karma, the qualities of enlightenment itself, and then claims about the higher capacities in terms of heightened awareness, paranormal qualities or abilities. Either marginalize these things as if they're not really important, or just flat out say this is part of the superstition of Buddhism, and everything that does not, I would say, correspond to or is not compatible with scientific materialism and the discoveries of science now, oh, the Buddha never taught that. Buddha never dealt with metaphysics, as if metaphysics is one category that we defined, and then it's a universal, that what is beyond our experience is beyond everybody's experience. That's just ethnocentrism and a type of really intellectual colonialism.
The target of much of Alan Wallace's criticism is the ideas of his fellow Tibetan monk of old, Stephen Batchelor, a writer, artist, and Dharma teacher based near Bordeaux in France. If Alan is among the most traditional of Western Buddhist teachers, Stephen would certainly be among the most reform-minded. The ideas in his latest book are highly controversial. Nevertheless, they are getting a wide hearing in the Buddhist community. Based on his research into the Pali Canon, he has reached an unconventional interpretation of what the Buddha actually taught.
I'm basing my work at the moment on my reading, and I think a fairly close reading, of certain early texts within the Pali tradition. And also, I'm basing my work on my own practice of nearly 40 years of trying to understand these teachings, not just intellectually, but also through contemplation, meditation, reflection, through my work. You see, for me, the practice of the Dharma engages the whole of one's life. The Buddha spoke of it as the Eightfold Path. That's actually a cummerbund that I found in a dumpster. And that used to be just a supermarket shopping bag. To me, the practice is the cultivation of all 8 aspects of that path, including reflection, including the work you do, including your ethical relationships, including your spiritual practices, including your view of the world. Right. And for me, therefore, a practice cannot be reduced simply to becoming proficient in certain meditative skills. Mm-hmm. I certainly would not dismiss the importance of that, but I would insist that meditation practice always be contextualized by the wider frame of the Eightfold Path itself. In other words, the way of life that the Buddha encouraged, rather than reductively saying, you know, this kind of meditative insight is the key to enlightenment.
The central point around which all of Buddhism revolves is the enlightenment of the Buddha, the nirvana that he stated is the potential of everyone, and many since are said to have realized. But what is it? From the mid-1930s on, through his writings and lectures in English, the Japanese Zen scholar D.T. Suzuki had great influence on the later development of Buddhism in the West. Suzuki had been trained in the Rinzai Zen tradition, which emphasizes satori or kensho, a sudden enlightenment experience transcending normal dualistic consciousness, where one directly knows the ultimate nature of reality. Later Japanese teachers, mostly of the Soto school, like the San Francisco Zen Center's Shunryu Suzuki, downplayed the importance of this kind of experience, and instead emphasized the gradual dawning of the awakened mind in and as meditation practice.
He was following Dogen's teaching, which was Zazen. Not just Zazen, but Zazen is enlightenment. So he always emphasized the practice. Just do the practice. Don't try to do it for some reason. Don't try to get something out of practice. So his practice was really the purest practice because there was no, it was not intended to get anything. It's simply just you do something for nothing. And as soon as you start to want something, it's no longer pure practice.
If you look in the text, the way the Buddha taught, he said, awakening happens gradually and slowly like the great oceans go deeper and deeper and deeper as you follow out from the shoreline. And then in another text, he says, stream entry, the dropping away of all illusions of self and separation, happens in a flash, in a moment. And enlightenment itself can be this great dramatic moment of release from the separate body of fear or the small sense of self into the vast awakening of the heart that is our true nature. Which is true? As is always the case in these beautiful Buddhist teachings, yes. Yes is the answer.
The traditional understanding that resolves this seeming paradox is that each approach emphasizes different aspects of the path towards Buddhahood or arhatship. Sudden glimpses of non-duality can set the compass heading towards the state of enlightenment, but the mind still needs to mature through gradual practice and deepening insight into emptiness, the non-self nature of reality. However, today many in Western Buddhism give these experiences less credence because they question something even more basic, that there is such a thing as the enlightened state.
The concept that everybody in the West had in the beginning, you know, of the enlightened master, and the goal was enlightenment, and everybody would come and try to get enlightened, and the place was run by an enlightened master who would have an enlightened successor, and everybody was groping for that goal. That was never the case. That was never the case in Asia. It was never the case anywhere. That even, it was a projection of us. We American young people, it was a romantic, idealistic, individualistic projection, which was aided and abetted by the Asian teachers who came here who were influenced by that view themselves. So in other words, almost all the Asian teachers who came here were aware of Western thought, were aware of Western psychology, were aware of, you know, the enlightenment lust that people had, and spoke to that.
But what is Buddhahood? I mean, I studied with Zen teachers who talk about small satoris and big satoris, and I know the Tibetan description of the Bodhisattva bhumis, but honestly, I have not found one single teacher up to now who could present to me in his life, in his person or her person, and in the way they were they could explain the path, that I have a clear image of what enlightenment is, except the lists I have learned. So, I don't know.
Of course, people claim experiences, and I have no reason to doubt the veracity of what they say, but unfortunately, simply to make a first-person claim, it does not carry a lot of explanatory power. the more for such first-person claims there were, the more authority they might have. But I feel that for the Dharma to be articulated in our day and age, we need somehow to bring together both our powers of reason, our philosophies, our scientific understanding of the world, as well as the kinds of experiences that are opened up to us in the practice of meditation itself. And again, I don't want to privilege one particular experience, let's say, of non-duality, and give that some kind of prestige, rather than recognizing how the Dhamma and the stream in which one enters is something that engages the whole of one's experience. And so I don't have much time, frankly, for these ideas of non-duality.
You know, where is the authority? And who has experienced enlightenment to start with that they can talk about?
Mathieu Ricard, once a geneticist, is now a Tibetan monk in the Nyingma Dzogchen tradition that emphasizes the non-dual state of enlightenment as the aim of Buddhist practice.
So you see there's a difference between rambling with ideas and then what came out of the Buddha's enlightenment, that's his teachings, the commentaries that are proposed, an elucidation of the Buddha's word by people like Nagarjuna, and then the great masters of the tradition in Tibet, and up to modern realized teachers like those we're lucky enough to meet. So, I mean, those, they refer directly to their own realization. And plus, if you need, they will come with a perfectly logical and based on the scripture. They have an immense knowledge of the scripture. They have immense experience. So how can you put that on the scale? You know, put the whole Buddha's teaching on one side and somebody's idea on the other side. You know, they're going to be projected right in space.
The nature of the Enlightenment experience by ordinary people is inconceivable. And therefore, they tend to collapse it into one of two options. One option is a kind of annihilation of everything, where nirvana is an other world of no experience at all, because they cannot imagine blissful experience, ecstatic, all experiences, even what we normally would think of as pain, as ecstatic. They cannot imagine a state like that. So they think nirvana must be an annihilation of consciousness, of subjectivity. So that's one extreme. And the other extreme is they collapse it into being some sort of euphemistic, kind of little bit deceptive way of luring people into resignation to ordinariness, full resignation into ordinariness.
Some things you shouldn't hear about now yet, because they only confuse you. And you make strange ideas about it, you know. And people start, within the Buddhist world, you know, and let's be fair, sometimes people start quarreling about if somebody is enlightened or not, or if enlightenment is existing or not, or if a normal being can become enlightened or not. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
If indeed the ultimate goal of Buddhism is Buddhahood or arhatship, it does require a great amount of practice. And traditionally, Asian Buddhists have accepted that it is an ongoing process over multiple lifetimes. But scientifically educated Westerners tend to be skeptical that any aspect of consciousness can traverse death. And so many Western Buddhists are agnostic about rebirth, or take the attitude that it is a cultural remnant of Buddhism's Indian roots, rather than a foundational realization in advanced meditation practice.
I mean, first, rebirth is a speculation. Rebirth is a concept. I would say rebirth is an expectation aimed at justice, which is not observable.
I personally don't take it too literally. Rebirth is a conception in our mind. We don't know.
Ton Lathouwers, a retired professor of Slavic literature, teaches Rinzai Zen in the Netherlands and Belgium. His group has chanted the sutras to Russian Orthodox liturgical melodies, and he uses Western existentialist writers in his teachings.
maybe that is for me the most important in Buddhism, that not giving an answer, but keeping it all open. Like a Korean Zen master, I was once for a month in his monastery, Sungsan, he always said, Buddhism is don't know mind. What is Buddhism? And he said in meditation, he said, don't know. What is rebirth? Don't know. That was something very beautiful. That was close to what I found in Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard. That is the failure of language and words, whatever they are.
In the traditional understanding of rebirth, one's underlying stream of moment-to-moment consciousness is reborn because of karma, the causal seeds planted by past intentional actions. Carola Roloff is a Tibetan nun doing postdoctoral research at the University of Hamburg.
This teaching on karma and rebirth was the reason why I converted from Protestant Christianity to Buddhism, because I was looking for what is the reason for suffering, you know, and I couldn't believe that God is giving suffering to the sentient beings if He has created everything.
I don't think that there's any way in which we can dispense of the concept of reincarnation and truly practice Buddhism in a serious way.
Geshe Nicholas Vreeland is the director of the Tibet Center in New York and a monk of Ratu Monastery in South India.
Whether we are making our way towards the attainment of nirvana or peace or a state beyond cyclic existence, or whether we're making our way towards the attainment of Buddhahood as a Mahayana Buddhist practitioner would, it will take many, many lifetimes of practice. And so to limit one's scope from the start to this lifetime is not really really making use of what Buddhism is all about.
But I'm not open to the fact of adhering to those doctrines simply because tradition requires me to. And particularly a tradition where you can find a number of passages in the earliest canon where the Buddha himself speaks very dismissively of being concerned about what happens after death, for example. I mean, it's not, you know, clear-cut. The Buddha is ambivalent. Some passages have him speaking about rebirth, others have him rather skeptical about it. But I think what the Buddha was probably saying was that this sort of conversation we're having now is actually kind of missing the point. That to get so preoccupied with issues that are basically tangential to the core practice is basically a waste of time.
Simply because we don't understand something, that doesn't mean that the whole Buddhist tradition for 2,500 years has come up with no discoveries at all, and that the Buddha didn't make any really profound discoveries on the night of his enlightenment. And so, what I'm calling for here, encouraging, is not just belief that, oh, the Buddha said this, let's all believe. The Buddha himself didn't suggest that or encourage it. He suggested people to be critical, but not critical in a closed-minded fashion, believing only one's own culture or only science has some unique, how do you say, approach to understanding reality. But very deep forms of meditation may also reveal some of the most important truths about the nature of consciousness.
What exactly it is that is reborn. Is it me? No. Is it my unfinished business? Probably, yes. And then is it reborn by some kind of magical device dropping into the zygote when sperm and egg get together and the third bit comes in, plop, and that's your karma? Is it like that, which some Tibetans would argue? Or is it, as a Westerner such as myself might argue, to say that there is the biological inheritance, which you could, if you want, call biological karma, namely the genome, and then after that, because of the cleverness of our genome, we begin to acquire learning from parents, schools, and the whole cultural stuff comes in with its prejudices, its likes, its dislikes, the whole karmic stuff which creates our trouble in life. So, I mean, when I hear about reincarnation, I usually think that this is the reincarnation of karma which has come from preceding generations, and we've learnt it, we've acquired it through culture. It's not been dropped in some magical way into our zygote. That's my own view, but then I'm a biologist, so I would think that way.
If you look at the notion of a continuum of consciousness, because after all, rebirth is about that, everything else is culture. in the West. It's completely out of the culture to believe in rebirth. In the East, it's so common that you don't even question it. But the real question is, what's the nature of consciousness? From Buddhism, the analysis is very clear. The immediately preceding event that triggers the next one, there has to be some kind of coherence of nature. You cannot go from, in one instant, being a seed of wheat, and then the next instant, here you have an apple. There is a continuum in the, so that means a totally inanimate instant, the next instance, there's not break of continuity if it's conscious, and then instant right preceding that is not. Okay. So of course the big picture is a meta picture, like the evolution of species when the complexification of the nervous system, but that's a long story. It's not in the milliseconds.
The Tibetan Tulku system institutionalizes rebirth, having sought out new emanations of previous great teachers for many hundreds of years. James Gimian is the publisher of the Shambhala-san magazine and Buddha Dharma, the Practitioner's Quarterly. He was a student of the late Tulku, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and he believes that the ultimate value of the Tulku system is not whether it's based on the truth of rebirth.
The 16th to the 17th Gyalwa Karmapa is a good example. In the 1970s and through 1981 when he died, the 16th Gyalwa Karmapa was a wonderful inspiration of Buddhist practice throughout North America and the West as he toured 3 times and taught. He died in 1981, but there has now arisen in the form of a fellow who's 22 years old, his successor, the 17th Karmapa, who has just made his first trip 2 years ago to the West. He presents the continuity of the inspiration of a way of practicing and being as a human being. What does that mean to the thousands of followers? Do they have to believe that some magical transmission of a human personality went somewhere for 14 years and then re-emerged in a little baby? Or do they experience the continuity of a particular wisdom that helps them? I think the proof of the Tulku system isn't about whether rebirth or reincarnation is true. It's about whether the succession of teachers actually bring benefit to human beings.
In the Tulku system, as in any